I saw your name in her phone. That was the moment my reality split down the middle, right there in our kitchen, with the smell of burnt coffee and the hum of the fridge filling the silence. I'd just gotten home on leave, feeling that strange mix of relief and anxiety, grateful to be alive, trying to act normal after months of sleeping with one eye open. I hadn't even unpacked all my gear, just dropped my duffel next to the table. She was in the shower, her phone forgotten on the counter. It vibrated once, then again, the screen flashing up a name I'd never seen. My blood went cold. Not a coworker, not a friend I knew, not a family member. Just a string of messages from a man with a name that meant nothing to me until I started reading. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The words on the screen made my hands shake, and an emptiness opened in my chest that I thought only war could create. Flirty comments, late-night confessions, secret plans I'd never heard about. My mind raced, filling in the gaps with the worst possibilities. I scrolled further than I dared, realizing this wasn't just a mistake, this wasn't just a moment of weakness. This had been going on for months, maybe longer. And as the water kept running in the bathroom, something inside me broke with the sound of every splash. Trust, hope, something I'd carried with me even in sand and darkness overseas. I set the phone down before she came out, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. I sat at the table and stared at the ugly little crack in the wood by my hand, waiting for her to come into the kitchen, my mind on fire with questions, accusations, and too many memories that now felt poisoned. When she stepped out, wrapped in her towel, she smiled at me with that same easy smile I'd memorized years ago, a smile I now questioned, wondering how much of it had ever been real. I wanted to ask 100 things. I wanted to scream, to beg, to disappear, but instead I just said her name, quietly, as if I was afraid it would shatter more than the moment. She paused, started doing that thing she does when she's nervous, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, not quite meeting my eyes. I felt the distance between us, not just in space but in years and betrayals. Finally I managed, "Who is he?" Her face changed, shock, then something colder. She didn't answer at first, and in that silence, I saw the truth even before she confirmed it. The world I thought I knew was already gone. The woman I'd fought to protect hadn't waited for me. In that second, I realized this homecoming wasn't a reunion. It was the end. And when she finally spoke, her words were a knife I couldn't dodge. "I'm sorry, I didn't want it to be like this." Everything freezes. The world tilts in 1 second. Nothing in all my years of training prepared me for the shock of her simple confession, for how the ground seemed to disappear under my feet. My ears rang, but the rest of the house was hopelessly, sickeningly quiet, except for the last echo of water shutting off behind the bathroom door and her careful, measured breathing 10 feet away. I looked at her, and it was like I was seeing a stranger wrapped in a towel, a woman who walked and talked and smiled exactly like my wife, but who wasn't her at all. My chest felt too tight, like I'd been running for hours through smoke, every muscle wound so tight it hurt. She reached for her phone, her eyes never leaving my face, and I couldn't help but notice that her hand didn't even tremble. My own hands felt numb and clumsy. I tried to hold on to the table, to anything steady. She was already looking at the floor, as if hoping that if she avoided my gaze this would all blow over. But it didn't. Anger, heartbreak, shame, they all hit at once. I thought of late-night calls from overseas when I heard her voice and believed every "I love you" was real, how I pictured her waiting for me, staying true. I pictured deserts, alarms, explosions, the reason I'd trusted so much in this one thing back home. I realized in that frozen instant there'd been cracks growing here too, quiet as termites, and I'd been too far away and too naive to hear them. When she finally broke the silence, it was only to ask if I wanted her to leave, as if she were offering to carry out the trash or pull the blinds at dusk. My mind buzzed so loud I barely heard her. There was so much I wanted to say. Why him? Was I not enough? How long? Why didn't you wait? But all that came out was a whisper, almost a plea, buried in disbelief. Why now? After everything? She wrapped the towel tighter, like armor, and dropped her eyes again. "Because I couldn't do it anymore. I'm sorry." I pushed away from the table just enough to stand, afraid I might break down if I stayed sitting much longer. My legs moved on their own, carrying me past her, past my packed bags and the leftovers from my first meal home, out onto the porch. The air was sharp and cool, filling my lungs and making me blink away the burning that threatened to spill down my face. In that moment, staring into the early dusk, I knew the life I thought I was fighting for was gone. Something had ended, not with a bang, but with a few quiet words, colder than any battlefield. Before everything fell apart, life felt structured, almost like following a map I could trust. I remember the routines that made things dependable. Early mornings getting dressed in the quiet gray light, brewing her coffee just the way she liked it, crisp shirts and her shoes lined up neatly by the bed. Even distance had its order. Video calls at planned hours, letters tucked inside packages, counting down months and weeks until we'd be together again. I built my life around these rituals, clinging to them in the chaos of deployment. Every little habit brought comfort. I believed that hard work, sacrifice, and loyalty were like bricks stacking up the walls of the home we wanted, solid, sheltering, and real. I saw my wife as the heart of it, the one person who always stayed steady through every rough patch. She was where structure came from. She made sense of things that felt senseless. No matter how far the desert stretched or how long the nights grew, I believed in her, in us, in the idea that we were building something worth returning to. She used to wait up for me, even on nights when I called from some cramped tent half a world away. I can see her sitting at the kitchen table, one lamp burning, her face tired but her eyes still bright when she heard my voice. We laughed about little things, planned imaginary vacations for a future that always seemed just over the horizon. I'd listen to her dreams about a business she wanted to start, or the garden she'd plant, and I'd promise we'd do it all, that life would get easier once this tour was done. I trusted her with every secret and every fear, not just because she was my wife, but because she made being vulnerable feel safe, even when everything else was uncertain. When I think back now, it's like watching a movie from a time when I thought love could carry any weight, that discipline and devotion could keep everything in order if I just tried hard enough. That world wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Or, at least, I thought it was. I miss not just the person I loved, but the sense of certainty I had before the cracks began to show, the hope that when I came home, everything would be waiting the way I left it. We'd built something that made sense, at least on paper. I had a steady job. The Army was the kind of routine you could count on, even with its risks and sacrifices. My wife and I were the kind of couple people described as solid. We'd known each other since college and weathered our share of storms. From cross-country moves to job changes to the aches of separation that came with every deployment. Our life was anchors and calendars. Mortgage payments dropping on the first of every month. Meals planned a week ahead. Birthdays marked by simple traditions. Even our arguments had a rhythm and a place. Most nights, we found our way back to laughter or a quiet understanding, convinced that love wasn't about fireworks, but about the steady work of showing up, day in and day out. There was comfort in that predictability. When I left for each tour, it was with the promise that what we had was waiting. Home would still be here, untouched and unchanged, like a favorite book left open on the nightstand. We had plans for the future, too, dreams that felt so ordinary they seemed indestructible. We talked about paying off the mortgage early, maybe selling one day for a house with an extra room, somewhere quieter with a bigger yard and sunrise views. She dreamed of opening a business, something small in town, a coffee shop or a little boutique, and I told her I'd support her any way I could. Sometimes, on lazy Saturdays, we'd stretch out on the couch and make lists of places we wanted to visit, vacations we'd take when my service ended for good, adventures we'd finally have together. It was the kind of life our parents had worked for, one built on sweat and reliability. We invested in each other, month by month, year by year, believing that the groundwork we laid now would one day become something truly ours. I trusted those plans because I trusted her. It never occurred to me that those quiet dreams could be upended in an instant, that a single choice could wipe out everything we'd built, leaving plans and promises as empty as the echo of a slammed door. I trusted her more than anyone. She was the person I leaned on, my first call with good news, the one I turned to after sleepless nights or hard deployments. She had this way of making me feel seen, as if whatever scars or weariness I brought home, she could look past them and still find the parts of me that were worth something. I admired her strength and independence, the way she could handle a bad day, and somehow make space for my worries too. She handled bills, the house, the holidays, and all the 1,000 tiny tasks that kept our lives stitched together when I was overseas. I felt safe handing over pieces of myself I never revealed to anyone else. She remembered the details. How I liked my coffee, the old stories I repeated after one beer too many, like she was building her own map of who I was. And as much as my job made me a protector, it was her steadiness that pulled me back from the edge when the world felt shaken. Loving her felt like both an honor and a relief. Even in the mess of life, I believed she was a constant. I needed her, not in some fragile, desperate way, but in the sense that I'd built my world around her presence and care. Even when I struggled, clinging to sleep while the nightmares crept in, just hearing her voice could settle me down in a way nothing else could. There was comfort in our shared rituals, the routines that meant everything was normal and safe. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me in quiet moments, and I knew she understood things I didn't have words for. I thought that kind of partnership could survive anything. Time apart, hardship, even the tests that wore other couples thin. She was the horizon I marched toward, the finish line that made any sacrifice seem worth it. When you place your trust so fully in someone, when you love and admire them the way I did, you don't see the cracks until it's much too late. And when betrayal finally comes, it isn't just your heart that breaks, it's your entire sense of what's real. We shared everything. At least, that's how it always felt to me. I told her more than I'd ever told anyone, right down to the ugly, vulnerable bits. What kept me up at night, the old mistakes from before we met, even my quiet fears about leaving and coming home changed. She was there for every victory and every struggle, no matter how small. We split chores and holidays down to the detail, choosing paint colors together, laughing at the mess we made on pizza nights. Money, worries, dreams, every part of daily life tangled together. Our calendars matched. Our passwords filled the same notebook in the drawer. If she needed to vent about work or wanted to celebrate something, I listened, even if I was halfway across the world, fighting exhaustion and time zones. We talked about almost everything. Future kids, how much we both hated cold winters, whether getting a dog made sense with my deployments. I thought it all added up to real intimacy, that the connection we'd built was as honest and visible as the roof over our heads. Looking back, I wonder how much of that was only true from my side. It was easy, maybe too easy, to overlook the gaps. The times when she pulled away, the things she stopped sharing with me, the little secrets that slipped through the cracks without me noticing. I saw her as an open book, so I never imagined there could be pages missing or passages rewritten while I wasn't looking. Sometimes I'd catch her staring off quietly after a long day, lost in thoughts she didn't want to share, and I'd chalk it up to stress or fatigue, never suspecting more. When she hugged me goodnight, I felt secure, not realizing security can make you blind. I took for granted that honesty and loyalty were a two-way street, that sharing a home meant sharing a heart. I was so certain we'd built something unbreakable that it never occurred to me she might wear a mask or keep a part of herself out of reach. It's cruel how easy it is to confuse being close with truly being known, and how sometimes the secrets we don't see are the ones that matter most. Back then, the stakes always felt so high because everything that mattered to me was tied up in this life we'd built together. It was about more than just a shared address or a wedding ring. It was our home, the one place I could unpack my bags and try to be whole again after months away. When I thought about the risks of my job, it wasn't danger or fear of injury that weighed heaviest on me. It was the thought of letting her down, of losing the space and the future we'd promised each other. I didn't just risk my life overseas. I bet my heart and my identity every time I left, trusting that what we had would still be waiting, strong enough to weather the distance. Even my career decisions were shaped by that hope. I said yes to every deployment, every awkward assignment, believing it provided the security and opportunities that would one day make life easier for us both. Family was the cornerstone. My parents, her parents, the hope of kids someday, all of it woven into the choices we made, the sacrifices that felt worthwhile because they were for a future I was sure we both wanted. My sense of self was so tied to being her husband that I sometimes forgot where one role ended and another began. To serve my country and return to her was the clearest purpose I'd ever known. A reason to check in on myself, to stay disciplined, to keep going on days when the world blurred into dust and noise. Every moment spent far from home, I counted down to coming back, imagining how I'd slip right back into the life we'd planned. I held on to the idea that who I was, a provider, a loyal partner, a steady guy, was something valuable, something worth fighting for. Her approval, her pride in me, it all mattered. More than I admitted, even to myself. So when the betrayal came, it didn't just wreck a marriage or a bank account. It shook every piece of my identity, splintered the very foundation I stood on. I lost more than a person. I lost the story I'd been living in, the belief that I'd come home to find myself whole. But then came the odd silences. At first, I convinced myself it was just stress. Life always ripples with little waves when I first came back, both of us learning to fit together again, finding our rhythm after months apart. But this time, it wasn't just awkwardness or exhaustion. She'd fall quiet in the middle of a conversation, her phone buzzing, her attention somewhere else. There were more nights when I'd find her awake at 3 a.m, sitting in the living room with the blue glow of her screen lighting her face, a look I couldn't quite read. If I asked what was wrong, she'd smile and say, "Nothing, just couldn't sleep." But the air between us felt chilled in ways I couldn't explain, stretching thinner every evening. When I tried to reach across that space, it felt like talking through glass, my words echoing without really touching her. The laughter we used to share over old stories or TV shows fell away. Soon, whole conversations were built out of small talk, pleasantries, and half-hearted jokes that neither of us bothered to finish. The late nights became a pattern. Sometimes she was working, she said, catching up on emails or paperwork. Other times, she'd step outside to take a call, saying it was her sister or a friend from work. I wanted to believe her. I tried to. But each time she offered her excuses, they sounded hollow, practiced, too easy to check off. There were weekends when she'd make sudden plans with friends I never met, coming home late and moving quietly, as if to not disturb me. If I waited up, she seemed surprised, almost annoyed. More and more, I felt like a visitor in my own house, an extra piece that didn't fit wherever she placed herself these days. And I started to wonder what I'd missed, what had slipped through the cracks during all those months apart. The home I'd counted on began to feel like a set piece, a backdrop for a life I didn't recognize. I was searching her face for answers, but all I found was distance, like she'd already left and I just hadn't noticed. Excuses began to stack up between us, neat and orderly, like she'd practiced them in front of a mirror. "I'm just tired. It's a busy week at work. I promised I'd help out at the office." Each answer came so quickly, with a smile so smooth that it almost didn't leave room for doubt. She would glance down at her phone, flick her hair back, and slide into a new topic before I could push back or ask anything real. It was like watching someone perform a script. Her lines were perfect, never stuttered, never bothered by my questions. Sometimes in the middle of her explanations, I'd see a flash of something in her eyes, a flicker of impatience, or a hint of guilt, but it vanished before I could name it. On weekends, when I asked about her sudden plans or late returns, she seemed almost offended by my concern, as if I was the one making things tense. Every time I tried to pin down the shifting ground beneath me, she'd reassure me with a gentle touch, a quick kiss, or a kind word that felt more hollow each time. The more she brushed me off with those gentle reassurances, the more I doubted myself. Her stories didn't always add up, but she was careful, organized. Each answer a thread sewn tightly into her version of our life. If I pointed out a detail she missed or something that didn't make sense, she'd laugh it off or spin something new. "You must be forgetting, I told you already," she'd say, so warm and certain. I sometimes wondered if I had really just forgotten. I started to feel like a stranger in my own skin, questioning my memory, doubting my instincts. When I was deployed, I'd always trusted my gut. At home, I felt like it betrayed me every day. I wanted to believe her, to keep our peace, but the weight of those tidy excuses pressed down until I could barely breathe in my own house. Instead of bringing us closer, her answers built walls, quiet, polite, and impossible to climb. It was like I was losing my voice, bit by bit, until all I could do was watch as she drifted further away, hidden behind stories that fit too perfectly into the silence. I noticed the changes, even if I tried to ignore them. Her laughter sounded different, hollow, quick, as if it was coming from somewhere else. She started crossing her arms at the dinner table, her body angled just slightly away, eyes always darting to her phone on the counter. It used to be that when I reached out, her hand would meet mine halfway, but now it felt like I was the only one stretching across the gap. I told myself people changed and that coming home was always an adjustment, that she was tired or stressed or just in need of space. I wanted to believe every explanation she gave, to trust that our foundation was strong enough to weather these small shifts and silences. Maybe I'd just been away too long, or maybe I was out of step with her new routines. Each time doubt flickered up, I shoved it back down with a private lecture. Don't overthink. Don't pick a fight. Don't become someone you wouldn't recognize. That hope was stubborn. I held on to it, even as it started to hurt. When she came back late, I stayed awake just to see her face and tell myself everything was fine. If a story sounded off, I'd repeat it to myself until it made sense, ignoring the feeling in my gut that wouldn't quite let go. I made excuses for her to my friends and my family, always insisting we just needed more time, always the first to change the subject when the awkward questions came. Part of me worried I was being foolish, that I was choosing the comfort of denial over the pain of truth. But believing her was so much easier than starting over, easier than accepting that the life I had built my identity around might be falling apart, piece by piece. I wanted so badly for her to be telling the truth, for us to be as close as we'd ever been, for trust to be enough. For a while, I managed to convince myself. I lived with hope as tightly held as any secret, refusing to let go, even as the evidence against it kept building, silent and steady as a tide I couldn't hold back. It didn't happen overnight, but little by little, the warmth drained out of our home. The laughter we used to share, once easy and real, started to sound thin, almost forced, like she was reading lines from someone else's story. Our jokes fell flat, fading before they could get off the ground. I'd reach for the familiar comfort of teasing her about the way she burned toast or the old stories we used to tell on repeat, but she'd just smile politely, her eyes never quite meeting mine. Even when we talked about normal things, bills, weekend plans, the weather, it felt like she was measuring every word, filtering every sentence. There was a caution in her voice that hadn't been there before, a sense of distance I couldn't quite bridge. Words at our table took on a strange, careful shape. I could feel her calculating before she spoke, always pausing, always making sure whatever she said couldn't be challenged later. Sometimes, I'd catch her hesitating, as if doing the math in her head, double-checking her facts. I'd ask simple questions and get perfectly packaged answers, but never any real feeling behind them. If I pressed, she'd get defensive or turn the conversation around on me, subtly making me feel unreasonable for wanting to know more. I was listening harder than ever, trying to catch a glimpse of the woman I loved beneath all that carefulness, but it was like she kept slipping away with every syllable. Somewhere in those thin laughs and cautious words, I lost the easy comfort of knowing her. Everything that used to feel natural between us now felt like a performance, rehearsed just enough to keep me at arm's length, never close enough to see the truth. It's strange how much you can sense before your mind admits the truth. I remember the first time she came home late. There was a scent on her I didn't recognize, a hint of some cologne that wasn't mine. I noticed a new lipstick in her bag, too, a color she'd never worn before in all our years together. She laughed off my quiet comment about it, saying it was from a coworker's birthday gift, nothing special. Her hair was perfect, her clothes freshly pressed, and she moved with a nervous energy that barely fit the story she told. My chest tightened, anxious without explanation, but I pushed those little doubts aside. I told myself she was finally doing something for herself, that maybe I was being too sensitive after all the months away. I didn't want to start a fight over something small. A look lingered too long, or her tone sharpened for a second. But if I questioned it, she changed the subject or laid a reassuring hand on mine, a gesture that felt more like a distraction than real comfort. There were slips, moments where her mask fell just a little. She texted with her phone angled away, smiled at private messages, and sometimes called someone babe in a tone too soft and easy for a simple friend. More than once, she scheduled sudden errands that dragged past midnight, or she'd come home with stories so detailed they seemed memorized. If I pressed even a little, she'd roll her eyes or laugh about me being paranoid, as if the problem was my imagination, not the careful secrets stacking between us. I caught her in contradictions once or twice. She'd insist she was at her sister's house, but her sister's social media showed her somewhere else. When I brought it up, she shrugged it off with a practiced sigh, brushing past the lie like it was a stain on her shirt, forgotten and unimportant. I wanted so badly to let it go, to trust the woman I married, but each time I brushed off another sign, it left a scratch I could feel long after. The signs were there, too many to count, but hope kept me believing, even as the truth kept pushing at the door. My gut started talking louder, refusing to let me sleep at night. There's a certain ache that settles in your bones when you know something is wrong, even if you can't prove it yet. I'd catch myself staring at the ceiling, replaying her words, trying to decode every gesture and late-night excuse. The uneasiness I'd brushed off before kept coming back, sharper each time. A coldness in her tone, the way she flinched at simple questions, and how guarded she was with her phone. I noticed things I'd never given a second thought before. Her routine changed. She took longer showers, kept her phone face down, jumped at every buzz. She started picking new fights, small and pointless, as if she wanted to build a wall out of annoyance so she could hide the guilt festering behind it. That hollow laughter of hers started to prick my skin. Her new perfume made the whole room feel smaller, full of something foreign I could neither name nor escape. Every little detail started to add up, louder and sharper until I could almost taste the betrayal in the air. I tried reasoning with myself, fighting back against the storm of suspicions, but it was like trying to hold back a flood with bare hands. I double-checked calendars, noticed gaps in her stories, and began to recognize the pattern she left behind. Quickly erased texts, sudden long drives, grocery trips that turned into hours away. I wanted proof, something solid to show that it wasn't just nerves or jealousy, but sometimes your body knows before your mind is ready to accept it. And I started to feel that bite, that sick anxiety growing sharper every day. Even when we sat together on the couch or lay side by side in bed, it was like there was a space between us no conversation could close. I'd turn over in the darkness, listening to her breathing, and wonder who she was when I wasn't looking. That gut feeling gnawed at me, refusing to let up, relentless in its warning. Something was wrong. Something had changed. And no matter how much I tried to believe otherwise, there was no turning that feeling off. Looking back, I realized there were parts of our relationship that had never quite settled right with me. Even in the good days, when everything seemed smooth and effortless, there'd be flashes of discomfort, moments where she'd clam up at a simple question, or get defensive over the smallest things. Sometimes she'd shut down when the conversation drifted too close to her friends from work, or time she spent out of the house. I always chalked it up to her need for privacy, or maybe just differences in how we handled stress and time apart. Still, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was always chasing after something she kept just out of reach. There was a sense in our marriage, not constant and not obvious, but always there, that I didn't have the whole story, that there were parts of her life fenced off, walled away from me. But I wanted so badly to believe those were just the normal cracks in a marriage weathered by distance and duty. I convinced myself every couple had secrets, that everyone built small private rooms in their hearts. I spent so long trusting her explanations and letting the unease pass that it almost became background noise, easy to ignore. When she laughed off my concerns, I told myself to let go, not realizing that was another sign I was overlooking. Every time I put my doubts away, buried them under the excuses and small reassurances, the discomfort would return, sometimes just for a split second. A strange look, an unanswered call, a vague story about where she'd been. I brushed it off, again and again, determined not to let suspicion erode what we'd built. It meant everything to me to keep believing, to keep hoping that love and time and loyalty would be enough. But the truth was, it never sat right. Not then, not now. I just didn't want to see it, until I had no choice. Then came the reveal, sudden and brutal in its honesty, a moment I'd both feared and tried to wish away. It didn't happen with shouting or a dramatic confrontation. It was quieter, but somehow even sharper that way. I woke up early one morning to the steady buzz of her phone on the kitchen counter. She was still asleep. The screen lit up with a message from a name I'd seen before, just once or twice, but always with a strange weight to it. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding, head foggy from lack of sleep, and then I picked up her phone. The truth spilled out in a trail of messages, photos, and glances into parts of a life I was never meant to see. There were late-night conversations, flirtatious messages, even plans whispered just out of my reach. My breath went shallow as I read, the words eating through whatever was left of my peace. In that moment, there was no more second-guessing myself, no more hoping I was wrong. I felt every inch of my trust collapsing, raw and undeniable. When she came into the kitchen, still in pajamas, and acting like nothing was different, I couldn't keep up the act. My hands shook as I tried to speak. My voice was barely more than a whisper as I asked her who he was. No anger, just defeat. Her face changed instantly, surprise giving way to resignation, maybe even relief that it was finally out. She sat down across from me, folded her hands, and the words came out slowly. She explained, without the tears or drama I might have expected, how it started, why she needed the escape, how sorry she was for hurting me. But as she talked, I realized the truth had been sitting between us for longer than I'd imagined, silent but powerful, waiting to shatter the comfortable lies we'd been telling ourselves. There was no fixing it, no patching up the cracked foundation I'd been so desperate to preserve. I saw our life for what it was, a beautiful story, undone by secrets that could never be buried again. Sometimes betrayal is loud, but with her, it was made of little things that didn't scream, just whispered until I couldn't ignore them. It started with a single message that popped up when she left her phone on the couch. A name I didn't know, words full of inside jokes and familiarity that cut through me like cold water. I stared at it for a long time, feeling anger and disbelief fighting for space inside my chest. A few days later, she told me she had an early meeting, nothing unusual on its own, but this time something felt off. She dressed carefully, picked out perfume she hadn't worn in years, and couldn't meet my eyes on her way out. I spent the morning in a fog, hearing echoes of doubt with every tick of the clock. Part of me wanted to follow her, to chase down the truth, but I sat at home with the silence, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just another anxious stretch in an already fragile season. The truth finally landed with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer when I found a document left open on our shared computer. I wasn't even looking for trouble. I'd forgotten the password and went to look it up, only for a file to flash up on the screen. It took a few seconds to make sense of it. Her name was there, written over pages I never expected to see. A draft email to a lawyer, full of legal language about separation and money. No warning, no discussion, just cold, official words about ending our life together. My stomach dropped, and it felt like the walls of our house contracted around me until I could barely breathe. That was the moment when every suspicion became real, solid, and impossible to unsee. There was no turning back from it, and no more denying what I already knew in my bones. She was gone, and she had been planning her exit behind my back for longer than I cared to admit. All the things I was afraid of had been dancing in the open, clear as day, while I tried so hard not to see them. Her affair wasn't just a secret she held in the shadows. It was an act she let creep into our ordinary life, woven into the routines we shared. I saw it in the text messages she'd leave half-read on her phone, the phone calls that turned hushed the moment I entered the room. There were nights I caught a strange male voice on speaker, laughter clipping off when she noticed me nearby. In the kitchen, I once found 2 coffee mugs in the sink when only one had been used before I left. Little mistakes kept stacking up, forgotten details, slip-ups that revealed she was sharing her life, her jokes, her energy with someone else right out in the open. When I tried to bring it up, she'd twist the conversation, blaming my absences, work stress, or even my own insecurities, making me feel small for daring to ask. Sometimes, she seemed almost amused by my confusion, like she had all the cards and wanted me to watch as she dealt the final hand. It wasn't just infidelity, it felt like sabotage too. With every little lie she told, she chipped away at my confidence, as if wanting to see how long I'd hold on before letting go. She hid things in plain sight, receipts for dinners, emails flagged urgent that she'd quickly delete, even a new social media account built for her secret life, right under my nose. She changed passwords, rerouted bills, started moving money between accounts without telling me. Looking back, it was as if she was setting traps, daring me to find out, and every time I hesitated or wrestled with my doubts, she tightened her grip on the story she told the world. My own life went from feeling safe and sure to like a room where the floorboards were giving way under my feet. Betrayal wasn't just about what she did with someone else. It was how she made me doubt what I knew, how she turned me into a stranger in my own home. Nothing I'd been through, not basic training, not deployment, not even the long, lonely nights a world away, came close to the feeling that hit when the truth finally settled in. The emotional blow landed with no warning, heavy as a punch to the ribs, except it didn't fade with time. It felt like drowning. One minute I was standing in the kitchen, phone in my hand, sunlight coming through the window like it was any other morning. The next, the air grew thick and impossible to breathe. My chest ached, heart pounding as waves of hurt and disbelief washed over me. It was as if the ground itself was shifting beneath my feet, every memory we'd shared losing its color, stripped bare by the knowledge of what she'd done. My mind replayed every doubt, every odd moment, every time I'd brushed off a suspicion. Instead of relief at finally knowing, all I felt was a painful rush of regret that I hadn't trusted myself sooner. The ache ran deeper than anger. It was a sharp, overwhelming sense of loss. I'd built my life, my hope, my sense of self, on the idea that she and I were true partners, and to realize it was all a lie was like being pulled under by a current you can't fight. My thoughts scattered in 1,000 directions, racing with what-ifs and why-nots. Everything familiar in our home felt foreign. Her mug on the counter, the sound of her voice, even the smell of her perfume in the hallway. I wanted to scream, to fall apart, to disappear, but mostly I just stood there, motionless and silent, as if moving would make the pain realer. I realized then that betrayal doesn't just wound you, it empties you out, drains every bit of trust and warmth until you're left numb and cold inside, gasping for something solid to grab onto. It was a kind of heartbreak that made it hard to remember who I'd been before her, or if I'd ever be the same after. Shame curled in the corners of every thought, squeezing tighter the longer I stood in my own silence. I felt it as a hot flush creeping up my neck whenever I remembered the little signs I'd ignored. It sat in my chest like a weight, making me wonder how I could have missed something so obvious for so long. Every time her voice echoed through the house, or her perfume drifted down the hall, the shame would rise up fresh, reminding me that I had let myself believe in a version of us that wasn't real. I replayed the moments I'd defended her to friends and family, the times I'd covered for her without question, and it stung to realize I'd been lying to myself just as hard as she'd been lying to me. The night after the reveal, I couldn't look her in the eye. I ate dinner at the kitchen table while she ate in the living room, the gulf between us finally too wide to pretend away. That shame wasn't just about being fooled by someone I trusted. It was about feeling weak in my own eyes. I kept asking myself, What's wrong with me that I didn't see it sooner? Was I really so desperate to keep the peace that I'd rather be blind than face the truth? The questions churned around and around, making it impossible to sleep, impossible to focus on anything but my own perceived failures. Even in my dreams, her face would turn away, vanishing into fog, just as I reached for her. I started avoiding my friends' calls and making excuses to my family, afraid they'd hear the humiliation in my voice. Walking through the house became a ritual in self-doubt, stepping over old promises, passing photos of us smiling at a happiness I now couldn't trust. The shame attached itself to every part of my life, silent and crippling, making even everyday moments feel like a test I kept failing. Isolation took root so quickly it scared me. After the shock and shame of her betrayal settled in, I started pulling away from everyone else. The trust I'd lost in her spilled over into every other part of my life. I stopped answering my friends' texts, ignored calls from my family, and let emails pile up, unread and unanswered. I'd sit in the quiet of our house and hear every small sound. The hum of the fridge, the echo of her footsteps, the distant traffic outside. My world shrank down to the four walls around me because suddenly nobody seemed safe. If the person I loved the most could keep secrets from me, then what was stopping anyone else? My mind told me to reach out, but the urge to just be left alone was stronger. Even a trip to the grocery store felt like a task too far. Each interaction seemed forced, every smile from a neighbor suspicious. I started looking at everyone through new eyes, expecting a catch, a hidden agenda, a lie behind every polite word. Soon it was easier to stay isolated than to risk another disappointment. I found comfort in long, silent walks at night or mindless chores just to fill the empty hours. I'd scroll through old photos on my phone, but even those memories felt thin and out of reach, as if they belonged to someone else. The thought of telling anyone about what happened, even my closest friends, filled me with dread. I hated the idea of their pity, their advice, or worst of all, their judgment about how I could let this happen. Every "how are you doing" that came my way felt like a test I would fail. Walls I'd never meant to build grew thicker with every day I kept to myself, and the few times I considered reaching out, I just closed my phone and set it aside. I wasn't only mourning the loss of my marriage, I was mourning the loss of safety, of the idea that anyone could be counted on. In that season, trust was something I only gave to the silence, and even that felt like a fragile piece. Tears came first, sharp and sudden, leaving me drained and emptied by the end of every night. At first, I cried quietly, alone with the ache inside my chest, not wanting anyone, the neighbors, my family on the phone, not even her, to know how much I was breaking. The tears didn't fix anything. They only left me feeling numb. With every passing day, the grief gave way to thick silence. I stopped trying to talk about it or even find words for what I felt. Sitting across from her, I found myself staring at the table or the wall, letting the hush settle between us instead of fighting to fill it. The pain didn't disappear, but it stopped making noise. It became a quiet emptiness that filled the spaces where trust and comfort used to live. Even the small comforts faded away. I barely tasted my food. Rice, chicken, coffee, all of it turned to ash in my mouth. I used to love making dinner, fussing over a new recipe, and sharing it with her over a glass of wine. Now my dinners were cold and bland, eaten in silence, sometimes standing over the sink just to avoid setting the table for two. I found myself skipping meals, forgetting to eat, losing track of time as the days blurred together. I'd stare at my plate, stirring food around without appetite or care. Nothing felt right. My appetite, my routines, my sense of home. It was more than heartbreak. It was as if someone had muted the world, turned down all the colors, and left me in a place where nothing sparked joy or even real hunger. Silence settled into every room, soft but suffocating, and even the simplest pleasures felt like memories from another life. Days started to bleed into one another, the clock hands circling with no real meaning. I woke up feeling heavy every morning, dragging myself from bed only because I couldn't stay under the covers forever. Everything felt pointless. Showers, meals, chores, all done by rote, none of them enough to distract me from what was looping in my mind. It was during those quiet, empty hours that self-blame really took over. I turned my hurt inward, dissecting every moment from the past year, every conversation, every look. If only I'd noticed sooner, I told myself. Maybe if I were more present, maybe if I was less focused on work, maybe if I'd told her how much she meant to me more often. The questions wouldn't stop. Was I boring? Did I push her away without realizing? I started apologizing for things I hadn't even done, both in my head and sometimes out loud in the middle of all that silence. I measured myself against impossible standards, convinced that her betrayal meant I was fundamentally flawed. I replayed everything. Did I thank her enough when she made dinner? Or was I too distracted when she tried to talk after work? Was I supportive during her rough spots, or too caught up in my own problems? The endless doubt became a constant companion. Even on days I tried to shake it off, to run errands, to tidy the house, to step out in the sun for a while, it always came back. In the loneliness, I invented scenarios where I could have changed the outcome, where I didn't miss the signs, where I somehow managed to make her stay. Sometimes I'd find myself talking out loud, going over old arguments and wondering if, with the right words, I could have glued our life back together. That kind of self-blame is a quiet poison, slow, convincing, and hard to put down. In those blurred days, I stopped believing I deserved better. I only knew I wanted the pain to fade and the doubts to finally go quiet. But then, one morning, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic or loud, just a breath, a pause. As I stood in the bathroom staring into the mirror, half dazed in the weak, early light, I'd gotten used to seeing a version of myself I almost didn't recognize. Someone hollowed out by grief and guilt. But this time, as I splashed cold water on my face, I caught sight of my own eyes staring back, tired and raw, but still there. For a moment I saw past the hurt and shame. My reflection looked battered but not gone, a person who had survived worse things than heartbreak. I straightened my shoulders and took a slow breath, realizing the world had kept turning while I was stuck. I felt the urge to clean up. Not for her. Not for anyone else. Just for me. It was the smallest taste of resistance, but it was enough. That quiet moment with my reflection didn't fix everything, but it gave me something to hold on to. I threw open the window and let the air wash over me, filling the room with life I hadn't noticed in weeks. For the first time in a long while, I felt the weight on my chest lighten, if only a fraction. I changed out of the same old clothes, made fresh coffee, and sat down with a journal to write. As the sun crept up, I put words to what had happened. Not just her betrayal, but how I'd lost myself in the aftermath. A tiny idea sparked. What if I started focusing on my own healing, instead of what I couldn't change? That morning, I promised myself I'd show up for my own life, even if it was just by taking the next small step. I didn't know where it would lead, but it was the first time in what felt like ages I could see even the faintest path forward. That breath, that glance in the mirror, reminded me I was still here, and I didn't have to stay broken. After that morning, questions started rising up, clearer than before. I didn't just pick apart the past, every word, every routine, every memory we'd made. I started to wonder about my own silence. Why did I let things go unquestioned for so long? Why was I so willing to swallow my doubts and back down when the answers didn't add up? I realized I'd taught myself to avoid conflict, always tiptoeing around anything that felt uncomfortable just to keep the peace. That habit seemed harmless at first, but letting things slide had let the secrets multiply. My silence became a shield I hid behind, a way to pretend things were fine when they clearly weren't. Looking back, I wondered if I stayed quiet because I was afraid. Afraid of losing her, afraid of facing the pain, afraid of what would happen to our carefully built life if I demanded honesty. It was unsettling to admit I'd let so much slip by, not just because I trusted her, but because I had lost trust in myself. I started to ask if my quiet was a strength or just another way of giving up before the fight even started. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that silence had protected me from hurt in the short term, but made the eventual blow so much harsher. I wondered if I'd missed other truths in my life, if I'd brushed off signs from friends or family just to avoid rocking the boat. In that reflection, I saw a pattern, choosing quiet instead of hard questions, and hoping the world would fix itself if I just waited long enough. That realization stung, but it also opened a door. If silence could hurt me, maybe using my voice, even if it shook, was a path to something better. I wasn't just questioning what she'd done. I was finally questioning how I'd stayed so hidden, even from myself. When the truth finally hit, it brought a wave of anger so sharp I could hardly recognize myself. It wasn't just a reaction to her betrayal, though that hurt more than anything I'd ever faced. It was anger at the lies, the excuses, and the way my trust had been twisted to cover up her double life. More than that, I was furious with myself for trusting so blindly, for putting off the hard questions, for giving away so much love without demanding the same in return. Anger flashed through me late at night when I replayed conversations and saw the signals I'd ignored. It simmered in my chest as I looked at our wedding vows, at the home I had sacrificed so much to build. For a while, that rage made me restless, pacing the floors, clenching my jaw, even slamming my fist into a pillow just for the sharp relief it offered. I'd always believed anger would only make things worse, but in those days, it was the one honest thing I had left. What surprised me was that the anger didn't just burn, it illuminated. It was like striking a match in a dark room, seeing all the pieces of my life with new, undeniable sharpness. The fog of self-blame and confusion started to lift. I realized what had really happened. I'd been manipulated, gaslit, and made to doubt my own reality so she could live two lives without consequence. The anger cut through the lies, forging a line between what was my fault and what was hers. For the first time since she confessed, I saw my own choices clearly. I could choose to keep living in the mess she made, or I could start climbing out, step by step, even if it was slow. That clarity didn't make the pain go away, but it pointed me toward action. It turned shame into the resolve I needed to change. My anger stopped eating me alive and started fueling me instead, giving me the energy to imagine a future where I didn't have to answer to her lies anymore. As the days passed, and the fire of anger faded into something steadier, I started to see a way out. I sat quietly with my journal and wrote down every thought, what I wanted, what I no longer could accept, what I actually needed to move forward. I realized I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to destroy her or get even or see her suffer the same pain she'd put me through. None of that would fix the aching hollowness where our life together used to be. What I wanted more than anything was to be free, to let go of the weight her betrayal had chained to my chest. I wanted release from the doubts, the constant replays, the bitter taste of her lies. So I decided to reclaim the parts of my life she couldn't touch, my friendships, my career, my own sense of self-respect. Step by step, I started rebuilding from the ground up. I contacted a lawyer not to strike back, but to make sure I could leave cleanly and fairly. I sorted through our house, boxing up joint memories and things that belonged to her, slowly restoring the place to something that felt like mine alone. I called old friends and let them back into my world, careful not to let shame or pride silence me anymore. I carved out a morning routine, exercise, a hearty breakfast, a few deep breaths with the sunrise, not for anyone's approval, just for the peace it brought me. I learned to say no to thoughts of her, redirecting my focus to what I could control and what made me feel alive. With every practical step, signing forms, making new plans, cleaning rooms, I felt the knots inside me loosen a little. This plan wasn't about erasing hurt or rewriting the past. It was about honoring myself enough to start over, to make sure her betrayal was not the final story of my life, but just a chapter I could close. I found myself growing stronger in the quiet moments, usually when the sun hadn't come up yet, or just after midnight when the house was still and heavy. Strength didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, pieced together from small choices I made when no one was watching. It was there in the late-night walks I took to clear my head, letting the cold air sting my skin awake. It was in the hours I spent sorting through my thoughts, refusing to numb myself with distractions, determined to face everything head-on. In those shadowed hours, I realized I hadn't survived deployments and loss just to be broken by someone else's choices. There was something fierce in me that refused to lie down, even when I still ached. I wrote letters I never sent, telling my story to the darkness, letting the truth see daylight in my own quiet way. Sometimes it was enough just to make it through another lonely night, knowing that every sunrise meant I'd gotten through the worst again. With each day, the shadows became less frightening and more like a shelter, a place where I could rebuild without the noise or expectation of the world around me. I learned to trust my own instincts again, to listen to the part of myself that still had hope beneath all the hurt. I reached for books that made me feel stronger, and listened to music that reminded me what it was like to be alive for my own sake. Even as doubt sometimes crept back in, I reminded myself that healing wasn't a straight line. Some nights the grief or anger surged up and knocked me breathless, but the difference now was that I didn't let it define me. My strength wasn't the kind anyone could see from the outside, but I felt it in the calm after the tears, in the steady rhythm of my heart starting to trust itself again. In the shadows, I found a quiet resolve to move forward, one breath, one step, one sunrise at a time. Finding the evidence was both a relief and a final blow. I started gathering small details, not to torment myself, but to finally see things for what they were. I printed the emails I'd seen and saved the messages that didn't belong in our house. Bank statements, hotel receipts, even changes in her social media. Suddenly, a pattern emerged, proof built on weeks and months of betrayal. Seeing it all in black and white made it impossible to deny, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of steadiness. Those facts didn't just prove what she'd done. They rescued me from the endless loop of doubt in my own mind. Evidence was harsh, but it was also freeing. It turned the story from shadows in my head into something real and undeniable. No more guessing, no more wondering if I was losing my mind. The truth was in my hands now, and it had weight. With that solid truth came a new kind of resolve. I promised myself I would not let her betrayals define the rest of my story. It wasn't about destroying her or airing every detail to the world, but about reclaiming what belonged to me, my sense of honesty, my strength, and my future. I set up meetings with my lawyer, organized the paperwork, and started making decisions about the life I wanted going forward. I could breathe more deeply with each step, each signature, each moment spent standing up for myself, rather than shrinking under the weight of her lies. I realized that healing wasn't about waiting for time to pass, or trying to forget what happened. It was about looking the truth in the face and deciding not to let it control me anymore. The pain was still there, but it no longer ruled my days. Instead, there was determination, steady, grounded, and built on truths no one could take away from me again. When the moment finally came, the confrontation felt strangely still. No yelling, no door slamming, just two people sitting at the dining room table with a stack of evidence between them. I took a deep breath and slid the printed emails and receipts across to her, my hands trembling only a little. Her eyes flicked down and then up to meet my gaze, searching for some sign of rage or accusation. But I was too tired for fireworks. My voice was steady, almost calm, as I asked her to explain, to be honest, just this once. She didn't pretend, not anymore. She nodded, eyes filling with tears she didn't bother to wipe away, then started talking in a voice so low I had to lean in to catch the words. She didn't offer excuses, just admitted to what I already knew. Betrayal, step by step, described in a flat, defeated tone that made it clear she had never believed she'd have to answer for it. There was no dramatic ending, just a silence so heavy it pressed down on the room, crushing whatever hope or anger was left between us. I listened until she finished, waited for any spark of old love or regret to push me to forgive her, but it never came. The pain was sharp but clean. I told her I was done, that I couldn't be with someone who tore our life apart and expected me to live with the ruins. I didn't shout, didn't beg, didn't even cry. I just stood up, my heart pounding loud in my ears, and walked away to begin packing what was left of my old life. She made no move to stop me. The end, when it finally came, was heartbreakingly quiet, a fading echo rather than the crash I always imagined. But there was something cleansing about that quiet, the feeling that, with the truth named out loud, it was finally over. For the first time in a long while, the silence between us made sense. It meant I was free. In that final moment, I watched her blink, just once, but it said everything. Her calm, careful mask crumbled as she realized there was nowhere left to hide, no more excuses or stories to weave between us. For years, she'd worn composure like armor, convincing everyone around her that she was in control. Now, with the truth laid bare and the silence of our shredded life filling the room, she was powerless. Her eyes darted from the stack of evidence to my face, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. She looked smaller than she ever had, wrapped up in a guilt she couldn't talk away or place on my shoulders. That single blink was all the weakness she would let show, a flash of panic, a glint of regret, maybe even shame at finally being caught. But it was honest in a way nothing else had been. I had waited so long for her to admit what she'd done, but the truth was, there was nothing left worth saving. The weight of her betrayal had finally broken through her practiced calm, leaving her exposed in a way I'd never seen. She didn't try to beg or bargain. She only stared at the table, her hands twisting in her lap, undone in the face of her own decisions. I watched her breathe slow, as if bracing herself for the fallout. I felt a strange kind of peace, not relief, not triumph, but clarity. She didn't need to say more. Everything was there in the defeated angle of her shoulders, in the way she shrunk under the bright light of consequence. For the first time, she had to carry the cost of her choices alone. The power she'd held over me with her lies and distractions vanished. She was caught, and I was done. That was how it ended. Not with another lie, but with the betrayer finally, quietly, undone. The tables turned almost before she realized it, and there was no shouting, no dramatic revenge, just the blunt, cold reality that her choices finally caught up to her. After I walked out of that room, there was nothing left for her to control, no narrative she could twist to make herself the victim. I handled every detail of our separation with a calm resolve she never expected. Bank accounts split, the house set for sale, a lawyer acting in my best interest for the first time, instead of me always compromising. Friends and family learned the truth, not through gossip but in my own words, with evidence to back up every claim. There would be no smear campaign, no desperate attempts on my part to win her back or keep secrets. I stopped covering for her, and in doing so, cut the cord she had used to hang onto my life for so long. She lost her grip, not through any act of malice, but by the undeniable facts she left in her wake. She tried to reach out a few times, emails, a late-night call, but I didn't answer. The silence was my mercy. My future no longer hinged on her moods or her manipulations. Each decision I made was a stone in the foundation of the life I was building for myself. I moved into a smaller place, traded our carefully arranged home for something that finally felt like my own. Work became a refuge again. The friends I'd shut out before welcomed me back, not with pity, but with the steady presence I'd always given them. Her stories fell flat without me to prop them up. The community saw her for who she was, not because I said anything cruel, but because the truth always finds its way out. With every silent step away from her past, I watched the power shift. She was left to answer for her actions in the emptiness she created, and I walked forward, head high, heart steady, free. For a long time, I carried the weight of her betrayal in silence, afraid of judgment or pity. But as the weeks went on, word spread gently through our circle, never from gossip but from the facts I chose to share, backed up by the evidence I'd gathered. I sat down with my closest friends one by one, told them the truth in my own words, and watched as understanding filled their faces. They saw not just the heartbreak, but the courage it took to leave, the strength required to let go of what I thought my life would be. My family rallied around me too. No one tried to fix or minimize what happened. They listened, hugged me, and reminded me I didn't have to prove anything, not to them, not to anyone. Even at work, where I'd tried so hard to keep everything private, quiet support appeared in small gestures. A friendly nod, a longer conversation in the break room, a simple, "You're going to be okay." Eventually, the wider community saw the truth as well. Neighbors stopped me on the street with quiet words of encouragement, some sharing their own stories of loss and beginning again. The fake smiles and half-truths my ex tried to spread couldn't compete with the reality of what I endured and survived. The facts, solid in everyone's view, protected my reputation even when rumors tried to grow. I realized people weren't as quick to judge as I'd feared. Instead, they respected how I handled everything, never sinking to her level, never lashing out in anger. The weight inside me lightened as I watched my real story overwrite the one she tried to spin. The world may not have known every detail of my pain, but they saw my resolve, my honesty, and the quiet dignity I fought hard to reclaim. That was when I knew I had truly moved on, because the world saw me for who I was, not for what she did. The power I'd lost didn't come rushing back all at once, but day by day, I felt myself changing. I noticed it in little things. The way I started walking taller again, the way my voice grew steady instead of uncertain. At first, I just forced myself to keep routines, show up at work, answer friends' messages, get out for a run even when I didn't feel like it. Each time I kept a promise to myself, I felt stronger, more in control. I caught myself smiling for no reason, enjoying silence that wasn't laced with doubt or regret. Small victories built quietly on one another. A skill learned, an old hobby picked up, a night out with friends where I laughed without worry. The man I saw in the mirror became someone I recognized again, scars and all. That sense of power was gentle at first, like a whisper in my ear. You made it. You're okay. What surprised me most was how natural it felt to start dreaming again. Power wasn't about lording anything over her or proving I'd won. It was in the way I'd planned for the future without fear. Choosing where to live, setting new goals at work, imagining new adventures. I realized I could count on myself, and that self-trust was the only permission I really needed. I even looked forward to simple things. Making my own breakfast, taking care of my home, finding joy in my own company. My heart no longer raced at the thought of seeing her or running into reminders of our past. I felt rooted, settled, and finally able to forgive, not for her sake, but for mine. Every step I took was my own, untangled from the lies that used to keep me small. My power didn't arrive with a shout. It arrived quietly, growing deeper each time I chose my own peace and happiness first. I walked away from it all, feeling whole in a way I never thought possible, sharper around the edges, but also more true. The pain and the heartbreak didn't disappear. They simply settled into the background, like old scars that don't ache unless the weather changes. For the first time in a long time, I felt fully present in my own life. I knew who I was, not because of someone else's approval, but because I had faced my darkest fears and come out on the other side. I learned how strong I could be and how steady I could stand, even when everything familiar was stripped away. The lessons cut deep, but each one left me more aware of who deserved a second chance and who never would again. My instincts felt sharper. I could spot red flags in a room or a relationship faster than ever, and I trusted my gut in a way I didn't before, all because I'd learned my worth the hard way. Looking back, walking away wasn't just about leaving her. It was about reclaiming every piece of myself that had been chipped away by lies and disappointment. There was a peace in making decisions for myself, a quiet thrill in chasing the life I wanted, without fearing betrayal would strike from behind. My boundaries were clearer, my goals brighter. I reconnected with friends, built up a network I could trust, and started shaping my days around new routines and goals that belonged to me alone. I never saw myself as a victim, not when I was fighting for my country, and not when I fought for my freedom at home. I became both softer and harder, a man who could care deeply without losing himself. As I stepped forward into that next chapter, I knew things would still be hard sometimes, but I also knew I'd never be lost like that again. I walked away whole, sharper, and truly free. Freedom felt like the breath I didn't know I'd been holding for years. When the door finally closed behind me for good, it was as if the weight of secrets, lies, and sleepless nights all lifted at once. I inhaled deeply, tasting the clean air like it was my very first breath. Walking to my car with my life in a few boxes, the world seemed bigger, lighter. There was still loneliness, still moments when doubt tried to creep back in, but those moments didn't own me anymore. The simple act of deciding my next step without worrying about her moods or what tricks she might have up her sleeve felt exhilarating and strange. Even the silence in my new apartment brought peace instead of nerves. Nobody was hiding anything there. Nobody was rewriting the truth. I realized that after living underwater for so long, being free was more than relief. It was pure, deep gratitude. I rebuilt my habits in small ways, opening the blinds every morning just to let the light in, choosing my own music to fill the rooms, breathing easy over a meal cooked for one. My world, once shrunken by suspicion and loss, expanded with every choice I made for myself. I learned to trust my instincts and enjoy my own company, no longer desperate for someone else's validation. Sometimes I even smiled for no reason, just grateful to have my life back, to spend my time and energy on things and people that fueled me instead of draining me. That's when I knew I had made it out. Freedom, hard-won and honest, was the feeling of finally exhaling after years of holding myself underwater, emerging into air and sunlight and possibility. Life picked up again, but it wasn't like rewinding to what I had before. Everything felt different, quiet in a good way, and steady, built on small routines that were mine alone. I made simple choices every day, like how to arrange my shoes by the door or what music to blast when I made breakfast. My mornings belonged to me, unrushed and honest. I worked hard, but there was no one waiting in the shadows for me to make a mistake. Evenings were for long walks or dinners with friends, the laughter real and the conversations effortless. Sometimes I still ached for what I lost, but the feeling would pass like a storm, leaving behind a clarity I'd never truly known. My world expanded with each new day, and I started seeing possibility where I once only saw endings. What surprised me was how much meaning I found in small, honest moments. A hot cup of coffee, an afternoon sunlight pattern on my wall, a text from an old friend that made me laugh out loud. With time, the urge to check over my shoulder faded, replaced by a quiet confidence that I could trust my instincts and build something lasting, even if it didn't look anything like I once imagined. The scars remained, but they were reminders of survival, not defeat. I no longer measured my happiness by someone else's presence or approval. Life moved forward, imperfect and unpredictable, but unmistakably real. I noticed beauty in the ordinary and let myself hope, even dream about the future again. That's when I knew I was finally living, not a story built on someone else's foundation, but one I created myself, one true breath and honest day at a time. There was a quiet relief in realizing I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. Not to her, not to my friends, not even to myself. The need to justify my choices or explain my pain slipped away one morning while sipping coffee at my own kitchen table, the sunlight soft on my hands. I stopped replaying old arguments in my head and measuring my decisions against anyone else's standards. My worth didn't depend on whether people believed my side of the story or saw the truth behind my scars. If someone wanted to judge, that was their burden, not mine. I was free from explaining the details of my heartbreak or convincing people why I had stayed so long or left so finally. I'd lived it. That was enough. With that freedom came a gentle confidence I hadn't realized I was missing. I made plans for myself, solo hikes, new projects at work, reading books I had put off for years. I learned to let my actions speak, to enjoy my own company, and to meet the world as I was, unmasked and unapologetic. Slowly, I started trusting that being true to myself was more important than crafting any perfect story for the outside world. The weight of needing to be understood by everyone disappeared. I didn't owe my past to anyone, and I didn't have to prove my healing, my progress, or my strength. Peace came from knowing I had survived what most people only imagine, and come out of it not just intact, but more genuinely myself than I had ever been. Peace didn't arrive with fireworks or grand declarations. It came quietly, In the smallest moments, soft footsteps through my apartment at sunrise, the hush after turning off the lamp at night, the way the world sounded when I paused to listen. I realized true peace wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the gentle whisper in the back of my mind telling me I'd survived, that each day would be a little less heavy than the one before. The weight on my chest wasn't gone, but it settled more comfortably with every simple, honest routine. I stopped chasing closure through confrontation or validation. Instead, I let it find me in cups of tea, in breath that moved freely, in smiles that surfaced for no one but myself. My life no longer needed to be fixed or explained. The past was still there, but its sharpness had dulled. That whisper of peace made room for hope. After so much noise, fights, secrets, doubts, I learned to cherish stillness. It was enough to stretch in bed and watch sunlight crawl across the ceiling, or to feel the breeze as I stood by the open window, not wishing for anything or anyone else. The silence that once felt suffocating became the space where I could finally rest and heal. In its gentle embrace, I remembered who I was before heartbreak and discovered who I could become after. There was no big finish, no applause, just the steady reassurance that I was safe, strong, and whole. With every quiet day, peace whispered through my life, promising I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The pain didn't simply dissolve as my life settled into new patterns. Memories still surfaced, a word, a scent, the echo of her laughter, and for a moment, I would feel that familiar ache in my chest. Sometimes, in the quiet after a long day, I'd catch myself thinking about what could have been, or wondering if I could have done more to hold things together. The sting of betrayal and loss lingered, showing up just when I thought I'd left it behind. But with each new sunrise, it faded a little. I stopped jumping at shadows or carrying the shame like a wound that needed to be hidden. There was space, finally, to let the pain live beside me without letting it dictate everything I did or felt. With time, I realized pain was just one part of my life, not the whole story. It shaped me, sure, but it no longer decided who I was or how I moved through the world. I chose whether to dwell on it or set it aside for a while, and most days I set it aside. There was strength in knowing I could weather the worst and find reasons to smile, laugh, and dream again. I acknowledged the pain without giving it the last word, and in doing so I reclaimed my spirit. I learned to let joy walk alongside grief, to let hope sit next to scars. That's how the pain lost its grip, bit by bit, until it no longer owned me. It was just another thing I carried, but I was the one walking forward. In the end, I found a strength I never knew I had, one forged in hurt and sharpened in silence. I realized that being betrayed didn't make me weak or foolish. It forced me to see clearly, to face hard truths without turning away. I no longer shrink from what scares me or pretend that pain can't touch me. I survived the lies, the humiliation, the lonely nights where hope felt impossible. I faced every ugly detail and didn't run, not even when it felt unbearable. That's a lesson I carry now, stitched into everything I do. I see the world with open eyes and a steadier heart. I trust my instincts and know I can handle whatever comes next. I know my scars, but I know my courage too. Pain doesn't keep me small anymore. Instead, it reminds me I can look any truth dead in the face. You taught me to never flinch. Not from betrayal, not from loss, not from starting over. In a world that didn't look anything like the one I built with you, I fought my way back to myself, through grief, through anger, through the worst nights and the slowest mornings. And in doing so, I learned the cost and the power of living honestly. There's a fire inside me now that can't be put out by anybody else's lies. I'm not afraid to lose what isn't real, or to walk away from people who choose secrets over kindness. Because of what you did, I stand taller, speak more plainly, and move through my days with a determination that comes from having survived the very thing I thought would break me. You taught me to never flinch, and because of that, I'm finally free.